Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Eric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3, and I have 3.
My name's Hallie, and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi, and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter, and I love eating.
My name's Chase, and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer, and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane, and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
This episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess is sponsored by the children's book Feathers Matter. As our kids grow up, they face challenges in their life, and knowing their self-worth and their value is crucial to face the headwinds. Purchase this beautiful story to read to your kids and grandkids and start the conversation with them at a young age. They are worthy, they matter, and their feathers matter. You can find a link to order on our Blended, Blessed, alwaysamess.com page. Mention code #blessed for an autographed copy. Welcome to this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess, where Angie and I are super excited because if you listen for a while, the last year plus of this podcast has been about grief and loss and how hard that has been for our family, how hard that has been for each of us individually. We've walked you through the ways that Angie has handled grief. I've handled grief, some of our kids, and everybody's different. It's not easy. So what I would say is that Angie always does a great job of finding us guests. I would say 1 out of every 5 guests we have is me. She's the rest of it. And so super excited because today Shannon Self is going to join us. She's a bereavement coordinator who works with a lot of people that are dealing with grief. And so we have a lot of questions. We might be here for a while. So I hope you packed some snacks and maybe some drinks because you might lock in for a little while, maybe even more than 1 episode before we're all said and done.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon, for joining. To Eric's point on just coming up with a different guest, I'm actually like a little bit embarrassed that we've been on this journey for so long and we've not had someone with your background and your experience on the podcast. So I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I am super excited to talk to you guys because I have just fallen in love with what you guys are doing. And I think that our society doesn't talk about grief enough. And you guys being so vulnerable with so many people is just such a beautiful thing. And I'm so glad to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. What led you into this bereavement coordinator? Because I would not sign up to deal with grief every day.
Seems like a lot.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Maybe share your journey that led you to this type of daily focus.
Yeah. So it's kind of a long journey. You know, everything in my life has pointed me to what I'm doing. When I was 4 years old, my mother was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and 9 years ago, she passed away on hospice services when I was only 23. You know, losing someone so close to you that young, I had never done that before. And so I was able to use our bereavement program through Compassus, and it is just such an amazing program. I had a bereavement coordinator that came and saw me once a month and, you know, sent mailings and called me and checked on me for 13 months after my mom passed. And really just being able to talk to her about how I was feeling and what I was going through was just something amazing. And during that time, I had decided that I wanted to help people mentally like she had helped me. Before that, I was going to be a nurse. And I was like, I'm okay with not helping people physically. So I told my bereavement coordinator that one day I wanted her job, but I really enjoyed her. So she was still going to work with me, still work for Compassus. And then 6 years later, I applied for a part-time different job and got offered the full-time bereavement coordinator job. So
cool.
She still works for Compassus. She has a different position, and I've been doing this for 3 years and 4 months, and I absolutely love what I do. And people are like, how do you do that? And like, I was there, and I know how I can help people.
That's awesome. It always like makes my heart smile when I see people or hear about people taking that pain and turning it into purpose, which is exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. And
It's beautiful.
I always have to tell myself, like, when I'm in a visit, it's not about me, even though it is very therapeutic for my own personal grieving process. And so I try to be mindful about what I share in my personal journey, if it's something that is similar to what they might be feeling.
Definitely. I do think that is helpful for people
Absolutely.
to know that they're not alone and someone else gets it.
Yeah. And, I think one of the most important things is just having somebody tell you you're not crazy, and, what you're going through is heavy, and you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. What do
I
you
feel
think?
like it.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like what you and Angie both said at this point is so true, in that most human beings just want to know that they're not alone. And anytime you can relate to somebody like you, or, my father fell over dead at 52. I was 27. And it was a complete shock. Is you just want somebody that can walk through that journey with you. And I don't know that I really knew anybody at that point that had been through something like that. So, you just hear all the platitudes of like, time heals, it'll be okay, blah, 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 blah. Nobody's ever gone through that.
Yeah.
And so what you're looking
In case
for.
you're just listening and not seeing the video, Shannon rolled her eyes at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Like, yeah, the platitudes, you get all the platitudes. And so I think what you're doing, having been through it, obviously gives people that are in it okay, well, I'm not alone. Somebody else has done this. Somebody's going to walk with me through this. And I would just say, as I work through, with our therapists and things like that right now, I have felt alone most of my life. And so and not just that, even a little bit before my dad was gone, but most of my life I felt very lonely. And so to work through that process and to know that you're doing that for other people, to make sure they know that they're not by themselves, super incredible. Grateful for you doing that, and looking forward to what you can share with other people that are going through something like that tonight. Looking for something that you can share with people that are listening to the podcast this week. Just really excited about that.
What do you think the number one thing is that people need to understand about grief?
To pick one thing, it's really difficult for me. But I think just the more education that we can get about grief. So there is a difference between someone grieving and someone mourning. When we think about grief, we think of, oh, they're sad and they're crying and, they're wearing black and, kind of like the image that you get, for people who are attending funerals. And people think, oh, after the funeral, they're going to get the closure and they're going to be great. And that's not what grief is, because mourning is what other people see you're doing on the outside to remember that person. But grief is all of that stuff that you're feeling inside that is so confusing and overwhelming. And it just affects every single aspect of our life. We think, oh, you're going to be sad for a while and then you'll be fine. No, there are people who have physical symptoms of grief. People feel like they're having a heart attack or, stomach issues. And, it impacts our spiritual thinking. And some people question their religious beliefs, and it impacts our social life. One day you might feel like going out and seeing friends and family, and the other day you just want to crawl into bed. And so I think that's the important part, in that even though you're seeing someone mourning someone and missing someone, you have no idea what they're feeling on the inside.
Gosh, that's so true. You're going to make me cry like right out of the gate.
I'm so sorry.
But no, don't apologize. That's so true what you said about grief, that it's such an internal thing, because I think what happens so often is that people put up such a front because, I don't think people really want to see what grief looks like. And so it's all internal.
Yeah.
There's that quote, people say happiness is an inside job. Grief is such a inside process. It lives in my head every second. There's not a day goes by that I'm not grieving. And I could be functioning, but I'm grieving.
Absolutely. And, I think the only way for people to kind of get a glimpse of how you're feeling is for you to allow them that access to what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And that's really hard for a lot of people because one, we're not used to it. When someone asks you, "Hey, how you doing?" You're like, "Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah,
I'm
they
okay."
don't really want the answer.
Right, right. But if you can find someone that you are safe with and you feel safe, being that vulnerable with them, what it ends up doing is it ends up giving you guys a deeper bond, even if you thought you never could. I have three older sisters, and I thought we were as tight can be. But, losing our mom, I was like, my family's going to fall apart. And that's not what happened. We were able to figure out how to lean on each other and kind of build our own little support group. So that's a beautiful thing.
How do you do that?
Do what?
How do you build that with your inner circle of family? How do you make that happen?
It's just if I'm struggling, I send them a text message, I video call them, I give them that chance for them to see me be vulnerable and then to then learn that I'm a safe place for them to be vulnerable. So I'm the youngest of the sisters. So it was a lot of practice for my older sisters to be okay with not having to be the strong one. And I literally just looked at them and I was like, I'm okay right now. You can be weak and I can be the strong one. Like, let's just take turns. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I think it just kind of snowballed from there, and just continuously letting them know whatever you need to say. I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to probably give you my honest opinion, even if you don't like what I have to say. But, that's how it is with family.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I am the oldest girl. So there's 7 siblings, 3 boys, and then 4 girls. And I'm the oldest girl. So I do think being kind of the oldest, it's different. Like you're grown, you're raised and you're, thinking that you're responsible and the strong one and the leader of the girls. Right. So that part's been probably one of the most difficult things for me is to be weak.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that I don't think is going to be changed in our society anytime soon, unless you are comfortable leading that example. And you guys are doing that already. You guys are doing an amazing job at that. I think one of the other things that I want to kind of go back to is you guys are parents. And a lot of the times it's, I need to be strong for my kids. And, what I tell people with that is I challenge that thinking because kids are amazing at observing and learning by your guys' example or anybody's example, really. And so if you guys can present that example of it's okay to be vulnerable in our home or in a place where you feel safe, it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's the biggest important thing. Grief is a lot of mixed feelings. It's a lot of I feel great one moment, I feel sad the next, and sometimes you feel great and sad in the same moment, and that's confusing. You're supposed to be one or the other. So you're supposed to be black and white. And it's a lot of emotions that are just really icky to process through. And the only way you're going to be able to express those emotions in a healthy manner is to sit in that ickiness and that just things you don't want to feel.
I guess I would say maybe, could you say that grief is to build relationship through grief requires a lot of grace?
Oh, no. Yeah. Grace is a huge, huge word, and not just grace with other people, but grace with yourself, because we are our worst critics, no
I don't
matter
know anything
what.
about that. No, I don't understand that.
So apparently, just
What are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying to me right now.
okay. I hate to use the term most people, but a lot of people are their worst critic.
No, I'm up there for sure.
And so giving yourself just that grace to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you are going to stumble, but it's going to be okay because you're going to have those supports to help you get back to where you were. And then the other really cool thing about grief is that even though you take 2 steps forward and 5 steps back, you're still going to make up those steps because you've already done it and you already know how to get back to where you were. And then you're just going to keep going. And so, one term that I absolutely love to use is I love it when people learn how to grow in their grief, which is insane to even think about. Because, like I said, growing is something that's very positive. And, with it being Easter this weekend, you think about flowers blooming. And, grief is just kind of like, ugh, like I don't want that. And it's just a beautiful process to see and to witness someone else going through it is just, it's a blessing in my life.
Yeah, I mean, when we're growing up and we're going to school and we're learning about all the feelings and all the things you're going to go through, they sure don't highlight grief in the elementary educational system. That's not like, hey, let's stop down today and talk about grief and how we're going to deal with it. It's like happy, sad. Let's move on from sad to XYZ, all those things. And so, what you're saying is 100% right. When you do get to be a part of it and experience it, it can be rewarding, but it's not fun. Like nobody's ever going to describe grief as fun. That's never going to be up.
No, I wouldn't say the grief is fun, but the way that you grieve can be. So I'm going to give you an example here. One of the beautiful things about my job, and one of the things that kind of upset me at first, was I don't get to meet our patients while they're on our service. And at first that kind of bugged me because I used to be an aide and I used to work in a nursing home and I had relationships with these, our patients. And then about a year into my job, I was with someone for that whole time and I was able to learn that patient through that person's grieving process because they were so vulnerable with me and they told me stories. And it didn't really hit me until my husband, who I met a year after my mom passed, never met my mom, but he knows my mom. He will say something that I don't even remember telling him. He'll be like, your mom would have loved this movie. And it's like Halloween or Scream or something. And I'm like, how do you know that? And he said, because you guys talk about her. And so when people say they live on through your memories and your stories, it sounds cliche, but until you witness it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting teary eyed again. I have had a lot of people message me or tell me that they know Hallie, but they've never met her. And it's because of us sharing about her. And that does make my heart smile, knowing that so many people know who Hallie Phillips was. And it's because we're sharing her story. So I totally get that. I get that aspect. So what advice would you give to someone that's trying to be supportive of a mom that lost her child? The absolute worst thing anybody can go through. I get asked this a lot. Like I feel like people sometimes, especially early on, they don't know what they can do. So like if you were going to give advice to someone that's like, hey, my friend lost her child. How do I show up for her? What would you say?
My 5-year-old son Oliver, who was diagnosed with ADHD, completely lost it in Costco. He threw himself onto the floor in an epic meltdown, shattering 2 pasta sauce jars. I was mortified, but that day wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning. I'm Dana Kay, board-certified health and nutrition practitioner, best-selling author, and host of the Soaring Child podcast. After that day, I dove deep into natural ADHD strategies, and what I found was remarkable, and the improvement in Oliver's symptoms were phenomenal. Join me on the Soaring Child podcast and discover natural strategies that bring real change for our children.
So I'm going to let you guys in on a secret about my job. And that is that 99% of my job is just active listening. So it is allowing that person the opportunity to tell you where they're at, and then you being able to just validate what they are feeling and just reminding them that it is okay. And kind of like we said earlier, walking with them through that journey, not placing yourself in that journey, which I think is a lot of what people try to do. And that kind of gets to like my worst advice is, don't attempt to make those similarities of comparing losses or rushing that person to get over their loss, because I tell you what, when you're grieving and you're deep in your grief and someone says that to you, you might get slapped.
I was literally thinking like punch in the face. And you were like slap. So
yeah,
I went to throat punch. Throat punch.
Yeah, good one, honey. Good one. Yeah, throat punch.
So, for example, the one time that this happened to me, I was at work and I was talking about how I lost my mom, and a person looked at me and they said, "Yeah, I was feeling that when I lost my dog." I was like, "You just compared my mother to your dog?" But whenever I walked away. I knew that I wasn't able to say something in that moment. But whenever I did calm down, it's just educating that person on, do you really understand how insensitive what you said was? Because I would hate for you to say that to the wrong person and then actually slap you, being able to go back and re-educate them, I think, is a huge thing, that when people are comfortable doing it, because I'm never going to push someone to do something if they're not comfortable. But if you are comfortable going back to that person and saying, this is really how that made me feel, even though that might not be your intention.
Yeah, I've experienced some of that for sure. I think when I see it happen, it's like, are the lights flickering, Eric?
Yeah, Hallie's showing up. Lights are flickering. Lights are
Stop talking about me.
Going crazy.
I think people just truly have no idea. The phrase of like, I can't imagine. It's like they literally have never experienced something so painful. And so they can't imagine. And then they also feel like they have to say something and they don't know what to say. So I love the advice on just listen. You don't even have to say anything, because there really are no words that's going to bring any amount of comfort.
Right.
But I think that's hard for people, don't you think? It's very hard because you naturally feel like you want to fix it, or you want to respond, or you need to say something.
Mm-hmm. So being comfortable with silences. So I think I was talking to a cousin of mine. It wasn't even about bereavement things. And they said something like, "Oh, I hate awkward silences." And I said, "Well, what about silence makes it awkward?" She said, "Well, it's just how I feel." Well, you putting forth that awkwardness and that silence is what's going to make that other person feel awkward. So why not just be okay with there being a silence? And that was one thing that I really had to work on when I first started this position, because I was that type of person. Okay, what's the next thing? We always have to constantly be talking. And then I was like, you know what? They're thinking, they're processing. And with all of the emotions that they're feeling, of course they're going to need time to kind of just process through what's the next thing I'm going to say. So give them that time and allow them that time to figure it out.
I think for me personally, sometimes it's really hard to talk about it because you don't want to cry. Like you're just going to lose it, right? And so do you find that with the people that you're helping? Like that sometimes you just try so hard to like hold it together And then you don't share much because otherwise you're just going to be a mess, like the
Right.
ugly cry, can't catch your breath mess, not like a cute little
Yeah.
tear coming out.
Right. So
I think
here's
ugly crying is cute. I really do. I don't. Have you seen my
nobody
wife
looks.
ugly cry? It's beautiful. It's really pretty.
I'm sorry, nobody looks great while they cry.
Oh.
And that is something that Hollywood has kind of fooled us in because whenever somebody cries in Hollywood, it's always beautiful, it's always pretty, or it's like super over dramatic and like, why, God, why? That's not what real life is. And so there's a couple things that I want to say to you, Angie, in that I think it's okay if you are in a situation where you don't feel comfortable fully expressing how you're feeling or expressing that to someone that you're with. What I don't like to see is you pushing that down constantly and never coming back to that emotion. So I'll give you an example. If you go to Walmart and you happen to see Hallie's favorite soda for the first time, that's going to pull at your heartstrings. But I don't like to cry in public. So I'm going to push that down. I'm going to compose myself. And then when I get to my car or when I get home, I'm going to have a breakdown because I'm going to go back and think about those feelings that I didn't feel comfortable expressing in that moment. That's what I'm okay with. I'm not okay with you just never coming back to that moment.
No, that
because
makes sense.
because if you constantly push that down and never come back to it and never find a way to express it in a healthy manner that's not harming yourself or someone else, then it's going to be your emotions in control of you and not you in control of your emotions. So it's going to be like taking a bottle of soda and shaking it up, and it's going to just explode. And you're not going to be in control over what is going to make you explode and who is going to, get sprayed on, per se. So I think that's the important thing. It's okay for you to not do it in that moment, but always come back and reflect on how you're feeling.
Yeah, that usually happens when I lay my head on the pillow at night, and then it comes out because it's quiet.
Yeah.
And you think and replay the day, and then you just start again.
And then she ugly cries beautifully. It's so pretty. In the dark.
I still
in the dark. It's so pretty.
And I was that type of person. I was like, I hate to cry in public because I always look terrible. And when my mom was actually admitted to hospice, my family they were like, we haven't seen you cry. Like, I'm so concerned. Like, are you processing through all of this? I was like, yeah, I cry in the shower when I'm by myself. And then I distinctly remember the thing that broke me in front of my family was we were sitting there talking, and it was when mom was very close to passing. And they were talking about what would happen, what we needed to do when my mom passed. And me coming from the aid standpoint, my question was, am I going to be the one that has to do postmortem care on my mom? And I couldn't ask that question. I couldn't do it. But I cried and I was able to ask my question. Thank goodness I didn't have to, but I could if I wanted to. But after that, it was just like letting a dam out. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to feel what I feel. And if people think I'm ugly, then why do I care? I'm never going to see these people again.
I can tell you, I never cried before I lost Sally. And that had forced me into, I'll be in church most times on a Sunday. I'm teary-eyed crying in church. Rarely does that not happen. So
she said I never cried. I never cried before Hallie, and the lights started flickering, and it's like, okay, all right, yep, okay, now they're coming back. Nope, now they're back. So
I remember when I was listening to your podcast, and it was like one of the first times you guys had referenced lights flickering, and so I want to touch on that because I think it's beautiful that you guys have found a way for Hallie to give you signs because I 100% believe in we can give people messages and they can give us messages. You know what? Even if I'm not, if it's giving you comfort, then it's doing something. So I think signs are very important for you to still feel connected with that person that you've lost because your relationship continues. It just looks completely different. But the important thing about signs is it depends on like how you feel when it happens. And until that happens, you don't know how to explain it to someone else. The other thing is if you if you search for it or if you find something that's so regular that you're like, "Oh, I really don't know." So I'll give you an example. I had a bereaved client who they had a bird feeder outside of their window. They were like, every time I see a cardinal, I know that's, so and so. And I was like, well, you put out a bird feeder and we live in Missouri and there's a lot of cardinals. I didn't tell her that, obviously. But
until today on this podcast.
I know.
Now she knows.
I know.
She knows. Okay.
But
okay.
but in that moment, if seeing that cardinal made her feel closer to whoever she lost, I'm not going to ruin that for her. And I went to my car and I let it out in my car. And I was like, I don't know, but even if I don't know, it's giving her comfort. So why take that away from someone?
Definitely. And yeah, I think that's such an individual thing too, of
Absolutely.
what does bring you comfort. Because gosh, I imagine it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question. So do you think that there is a time span, like on average, that the pain starts to ease up? Because as you can imagine, I am connected with a lot of moms, right? They have lost their kiddos, and it could be 3 months ago, it could be 15 years ago. And I don't get the vibe that it ever really goes away. So then in your role and you helping others grieving, how do you handle that at the early stages for them to recognize like, oh yeah, you're stuck with this. It's not going away. I mean, obviously you don't tell them that, but do you see that? Like, do you believe that? I feel like you find more moments of joy, but it's not like this thing is going to go away.
No, your grief pain is not a pain that is because of something physical. It's not like you broke your arm and we're going to put it in a cast and you're going to be fine in however long. Sorry, I've never broken a bone before.
Me either.
But your grief stays with you for the rest of your life because grief is something that the price we have to pay for loving someone unconditionally. And you're always going to love your daughter. Both of you are always going to love your daughter. So of course that pain and that wishing that she were still here is still going to be there. What you can do is find ways. I haven't figured out the way to word this because taking the edge off, not feeling it and more intensely, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is find ways for you to live with your grief every day and find ways that, again, you can do it in a healthy manner and express your grief. So I'll give you an example. I always, 100%, always miss my mom. That's a given. But on those special days, my wedding day, my graduation, I was able to find a way to, before everyone else got up, and I don't know if anybody knows this, maybe my husband, before everybody else got up, I was alone and I wrote my mom a letter and I just told her what was going on in my life. I told her, this isn't how I pictured it. I pictured you walking me down the aisle, but I know you are with me. And so it was just this very special moment where it was just me and my mother. And I was able to have her be a part of those very special days. That was a heavy grief day, but I didn't want it to be such a heavy grief day that every moment was grief. So I isolated it. I gave myself that time before I did my hair, before I did my makeup, before I put my dress on. I gave that time and I was able to grieve my mom not being there. And then the rest of the day, not that I wasn't thinking about my mom, not that there was never a moment where I was like, oh, I'm so glad. And it was the happiest day of my life, of course. But doing that at the beginning of the day was me including her in the most special day of my life. And so I was able to feel that happiness and that sadness all at the same time. There were some moments where I did cry because it was more noticeable that my mom wasn't there. But like I said, I isolated it a little bit more. It was still very, very heavy, but I was still able to kind of sprinkle it in the rest of the day. So I was able to live through that happy moment. And I can't believe that I actually got through the day without my mother, but that's what I do. And so again, finding the way that you can continue that relationship with that person, include them in every single day of your life, talk to them, write them letters, enjoy their favorite things every year. On my mom's birthday was in January and the anniversary of her death was in February. Every single year, my husband knows when I bring home cheesecake, we're either celebrating my mom's birthday or we're celebrating her death. And that's just what we do. And he enjoys it now, I'm pretty sure. Even if he did it, he'd have to deal with it.
Did your mom make cheesecake or she just loved cheesecake?
No, she just loved cheesecake.
Yeah.
It was her favorite. And her family and everybody in my family always said, if you don't do anything on your birthday, that's fine, but everybody deserves cake on their birthday. And my mom still deserves cake on her birthday.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such great advice of just isolating it and carving out time to make sure you're not too busy to pause, sit in it, get it all out. And then, like I say, get your big girl pants on and go through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The choices that you have.
I'm gonna challenge that because
I like it.
you sitting in those, I hate to say positive and negative emotions, but sitting in those icky emotions and feeling it, I'd say that's more you putting on your big girl pants than getting through the rest of your day, because not everybody's doing it.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I'm not going to say that again that way. I will rephrase it. That's true. Yeah, I appreciate that for sure.
Yeah. You guys are doing amazing.
Thank you.
It is so difficult, but it is something that is absolutely beautiful when you guys are sharing it with each other. And I love the way that you were explaining how to know what your partner needs in that moment. And Eric, give yourself that credit.
That? We did?
Yes.
Wow.
Because
what episode was that?
I can't say I remember.
When we were talking about like understanding like how to show up for each other. He's being sarcastic.
I am. I feel like
at that. Some days we're better at that than others.
I just know for me, I feel like Paula Abdul so often.
Oh
where
my God.
It's like one step forward, I take two steps back.
Yeah.
Yep.
We come together because opposites attract.
Yeah.
So you didn't expect a Paula Abdul reference in this?
No, I was really curious where you were going with it because I was like, oh man, what Paula Abdul song do I?
You never know. You never know.
So I want to let you in on a little secret, Shannon, is that I know why the lights are flickering because what Hallie loved to make was cheesecake. That was her specialty. And she was amazing at it.
So good.
When we
the
go
best
places,
cheesecakes.
When we go places to eat or we want to honor her, it's cheesecake and Dr.
Oh, you guys are giving me chills.
That's why
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And so, you know what? Hallie's going to go and find my mom and they're going to enjoy some of her cheesecake.
Love it.
I guarantee it.
Love it. Well, I think that's a great place for us to wrap this week because we still have questions to ask. So just really appreciate you being a part of the show today. And we've only ever before had one other guest be on for 2. And so this is, Shannon, it's like, it's awkward in that we are asking you to go on a second date with us at this point in time.
Of course I will. Just don't tell my husband.
Gosh, The Bachelor. Will you accept this rose?
Do I get a rose?
Will you accept this rose to come back for episode number 2? Okay. So we will be back next week with episode number 2. And if for some reason Shannon gets another rose, it'd be like uncharted territory to go to number 3. But we appreciate everybody being a part of this week's episode. And we look forward to talking to you again next week. And God bless.
Thank you for listening to Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.